Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Olympic National Park, Washington, October 28, 2014. The rain had stopped an hour ago, but the forest hadn't noticed. Water still fell from the canopy in fat, irregular drops that struck Chris Brennan's hood with sounds like small judgments. 14 hours. He'd been searching for 14 hours, and the Hoh rainforest had given him nothing but more questions. Chris knelt beside a Douglas fir, its trunk thick as a minivan, and examined the moss. His headlamp cut a circle of white in the gathering dusk. The moss grew wrong here, pressed flat in places, as if something had leaned against the tree recently. But the pattern made no sense. The compression ran vertically, up the trunk, defying gravity and logic in equal measure. He pulled out his field notebook, the pages swollen with moisture despite the waterproof cover, and sketched what he saw. His colleagues at the ranger station had stopped reading his reports 2 years ago. Too detailed, they said. Too theoretical. They wanted facts, coordinates, times, conditions. They didn't want his observations about how the forest behaved, how it seemed to respond to certain stimuli, how disappearances clustered around specific locations during specific lunar phases. Hannah Cortez had disappeared somewhere along this section of the Hoh River Trail. 22 years old, University of Washington graduate student, researching fungal networks in old-growth forests. She'd checked in at the ranger station 36 hours ago, filed her route plan, showed Chris her permits with the careful efficiency of someone who'd done her homework. He remembered her because she'd asked intelligent questions about the Hall of Mosses, about why certain areas seemed to have microclimates that didn't match the broader patterns. "You notice things," she'd said, studying him with dark, analytical eyes. The other rangers just recite the brochure. He'd felt something then, not attraction exactly, but recognition. Another person who saw the world in layers, who understood that surfaces lied. Her parents had called the station at dawn, panicked. Hannah always checked in, always. When she didn't answer her satellite phone, didn't respond to texts, they knew something was wrong. Chris had volunteered to lead the search before anyone could assign it to someone else. The other rangers seemed relieved. Let the weird one handle the weird case. Now, as the October light bled away between the ancient trees, Chris stood and consulted his GPS. The device showed his location clearly: 47.83, 7 degree N, 123.93, 20 degree DW, elevation 578 feet. But the map on the screen didn't match what he saw. The trail should curve east here, following the river. Instead, it ran straight ahead into a section of forest he didn't recognize. He powered the GPS off and on, the same reading, same impossible geography. Chris pulled out his radio. "Station, this is Brennan. I'm approximately 2 miles past the Hall of Mosses turnoff. Checking in." Static answered him. He adjusted the frequency, tried again. Nothing but white noise with a strange rhythm to it, almost like breathing. The forest had gone quiet. No birds, no rustling. Even the ever-present drip of water seemed muted. In 15 years of ranger work, Chris had learned to read silence. This wasn't the peaceful quiet of dusk. This was the silence of held breath, of something waiting. He started walking again, following the trail his GPS claimed didn't exist. The moss here grew thicker than anywhere else he'd seen in the park, coating everything in a carpet of green so dense it muffled his footsteps. Sitka spruce and western hemlock towered overhead, their branches knitting together to create a ceiling that blocked what little remained of the day's light. Something caught his eye, a flash of color that didn't belong. He approached carefully, thumb on the button of his flashlight. A backpack hung from a branch 8 feet off the ground, neatly positioned as if someone had placed it there with deliberation. The fabric was soaked through, but Chris recognized the purple and gray pattern. Hannah's pack. He'd watched her hoist it onto her shoulders in the parking lot yesterday morning. Chris documented everything with his camera, taking shots from multiple angles before attempting to retrieve it. The branch was too high to reach. He looked around for something to stand on, and that's when he noticed the trees. They were wrong. Not wrong in any way he could articulate in an incident report, but wrong in the way his scientist's brain processed pattern and deviation. The spacing was too regular. The moss grew in spirals that matched each other too precisely, and the trees themselves. He stepped closer to the nearest one, touched its bark with his gloved hand. The texture felt normal, the moisture level appropriate for the climate. But when he looked at the whole of it, trunk to canopy, his eyes couldn't quite hold the image. The tree seemed to shift, to occupy slightly different positions depending on how he focused. He closed his eyes, counted to 5, opened them. The sensation persisted. Vertigo, he said aloud, his voice swallowed by the moss. Dehydration. 14 hours is too long. But Chris Brennan had a PhD in environmental science he'd never defended because he'd discovered something during his field research that his committee couldn't accept. He documented it meticulously. Areas of wilderness where spatial relationships became fluid, where the rules governing how matter occupied space seemed to soften. His advisor had suggested psychiatric evaluation. His committee had quietly suggested he pursue other interests, so he'd become a ranger instead. And he'd kept documenting. He pulled out his notebook again, began to write. Time, approximately 17:45. Location, coordinates questionable. Observation, spatial distortion consistent with Class 3 anomaly as documented in unpublished research 2009-2011. Hannah's pack positioned above reach, no ladder or climbing evidence. Trees displaying. A voice called out from somewhere ahead. Hello? Is someone there? Chris's head snapped up. The voice was female, young, scared. It could be Hannah. Hannah Cortez, this is Ranger Brennan. I'm here to help you. Oh, thank God. The relief in the voice was palpable. I'm lost. I can't find the trail. Everything looks the same. Chris started forward, moving toward the sound. Keep talking so I can find you. How long have you been out here? I don't know. A few hours. My watch stopped working. He pushed through a curtain of hanging moss, entered a clearing he'd never seen before. The Hoh rainforest didn't have clearings like this. Perfectly circular, ringed by trees that seemed to lean inward, as if listening. In the center stood a woman with her back to him, wearing a rain jacket and jeans. Hannah? She turned, and Chris's mind performed several calculations simultaneously. The woman had Hannah's dark hair, Hannah's height and build, but her face was wrong, not deformed or monstrous, just slightly off, as if seen through water, and her eyes held too much depth like looking into wells that had no bottom. You came looking for me, the woman said, and her voice was Hannah's voice but also other voices, layered beneath it like harmonics. Chris took a step back, hand moving to the radio on his belt. Who are you? We're everyone who got lost here. The woman's face flickered, became someone else's face, a man's, weathered and bearded, then flickered again, a child's face, then Hannah's again. We've been waiting so long. The forest keeps us, do you understand? It keeps us all. The trees around the clearing had started to move, swaying, though no wind blew. Chris's training screamed at him to run, but his scientific mind overrode it. Document, observe, understand. The mining disaster, he said, pieces clicking into place. 1923, the Hoh Valley mining camp. 37 workers killed when the tunnel collapsed during that earthquake. The thing wearing Hannah's face smiled, and the smile contained too many teeth, too many expressions. He remembers. He knows the history. We died in the dark, and the forest took us, made us part of its dreaming. But we want to be whole again. We want to be separate. Where's Hannah? The real Hannah Cortez? She's with us now. She's part of us. You can be too. You understand things the others don't. We've watched you, writing in your little book, seeing what others won't see. Chris's hand found the radio. He pressed the button, didn't speak, just held it down, an emergency signal. The static that responded had voices in it now, dozens of them, speaking over each other in languages he didn't know. The forest is thin here. The entity continued, taking a step toward him. Time doesn't work right. We've been here for 90 years and 90 seconds. We've been here forever. And now you're here, and you're smart enough to help us. Help you do what? Leave. We want to leave. We've been trying for so long, but we're scattered, fragmented. We need someone living, someone whole, to carry us out. Chris's mind raced through the implications. A collective consciousness, born from violent death, trapped by whatever quantum strangeness affected this area. They weren't evil. They were desperate, confused, lost. I can't do that, he said quietly. You know I can't. The clearing erupted with sound. Dozens of voices screaming, pleading, demanding. The woman's form dissolved into smoke and reformed as different people, cycling through faces so quickly Chris couldn't track them. The trees bent further inward, and the moss began to glow with a faint phosphorescence that had no natural source. Chris ran. He crashed through the undergrowth, his headlamp beam jumping wildly. Behind him, the voices multiplied. Ahead of him, the forest rearranged itself. He'd memorized the trail system, every branch and landmark, but nothing matched his memory. He passed the same fallen log 3 times, approached it from different directions each time. Ahead, he saw a figure, another Hannah, this one beckoning. To his left, a man in 1920s mining clothes stumbled between the trees. Above, shadows moved through the canopy that weren't cast by anything. His radio crackled. Brennan? Brennan, respond. Johnson's voice, the senior ranger, distant and distorted. We've got your emergency signal. What's your location? Chris grabbed the radio, still running. Johnson, I found evidence of Hannah Cortez, but He looked around, realized he had no idea where he was. The GPS was spinning, the needle rotating continuously. I'm experiencing spatial disorientation, possible environmental contamination, air quality compromised. He had to give them something they'd believe, something that would make sense in an incident report. Copy that. We're organizing a team. Can you make it back to the trailhead? Negative. The forest opened up and Chris stumbled into another clearing. Not the same one, this one was larger, and in its center stood a structure he recognized from historical photographs. The Ho Valley Mining Camp Administration Building, wooden and weathered, somehow intact despite being abandoned for 90 years. It shouldn't be here. It had been demolished in 1928, the entire camp disassembled. Chris had read the records. Brennan? Johnson's voice was barely audible through the static. Brennan, we're losing you. Chris approached the building slowly. The door hung open, and inside he could see the flicker of lamplight. Not electric. Oil lamps, the kind miners would have used in 1923. He should run. Everything in his training said to retreat, to mark the location, to come back with a team. But Hannah was still missing, and if any part of her consciousness remained separate from the collective entity, time mattered. In quantum terms, observation collapsed probability. If he left now, the waveform might resolve wrong. Chris entered the building. Inside defied geometry. The single-room structure seemed to contain multiple spaces, overlapping like double-exposed photographs. In one overlay, he saw the building as it must have been. Desks, filing cabinets, maps on the walls. In another, the room was filled with people, translucent and flickering, going about work they'd been doing the day they died. In a third overlay, Hannah sat at a desk, writing in a notebook. She looked up as he entered, and her eyes were her own. Chris, oh God, you're real. You're actually real. He moved toward her carefully, watching the overlapping realities shift around him. Hannah, we need to go. Now. I can't. She gestured around the room. I've been trying. Every time I reach the door, I end up back at the desk. They keep showing me things, telling me things. The forest keeps people, Chris. It keeps their patterns, their consciousness. When you die here under the right conditions, you don't go away, you just persist, loop. Chris pulled out his notebook, started writing rapidly. Describe what you experienced, exactly. Timestamps if you can. Are you seriously taking notes right now? I'm documenting. It's what I do. He looked up at her. And I'm thinking, give me data. Hannah managed a shaky laugh. Okay, scientist mode, I can do that. She took a breath, steadied herself. I left the trailhead at 06:30 yesterday. Reached the Hall of Mosses by 08:15. Started taking samples. Around 10 I noticed the moss patterns looked artificial, too regular. I went off trail to investigate, maybe 20 meters. That's when things got weird. The trees started looking like they were in the wrong places. My compass started spinning. I tried to backtrack, but the trail wasn't there anymore. Then what? I wandered. Hours, I think. But my watch stopped and the light never really changed. I kept seeing people, hikers I thought at first. But they'd vanish when I got close. Then I found this building, and they were all here, all those people. They said they died in 1923. They said the earthquake did something to this place, cracked it open, and everything that dies here gets stuck. Chris wrote faster. Did they tell you what they want? To leave. To stop being all mixed together. They said if enough of them could merge with someone living, they could piggyback out, but it would mean... She trailed off, looked at him with frightened eyes. It would mean dying, wouldn't it? Being overwritten. Probably. Chris looked around the room, at the ghostly miners going about their eternal routine. This is a closed time-like curve. Einstein-Rosen bridge, maybe, if we're being generous with theoretical physics. The earthquake didn't just kill them. It trapped their information state in a quantum loop. They're not ghosts in the traditional sense. They're more like recordings playing eternally, but recordings that are conscious, aware. Can you speak English, please? They're stuck in a moment that keeps repeating. The forest isn't haunted. It's glitched. He turned to face the room full of spectral figures. And they know I understand. That's why they let me in. They think I can help them. One of the figures approached, a man in his 50s wearing a supervisor's clothing. His face flickered between present and absent, solid and smoke. You see truly, the man said, his voice layered with others. We've been watching you for years, Ranger Brennan. Every visit to the forest, every observation, every note. You almost understand, you almost see the whole pattern. I see enough to know I can't help you. If I let you merge with me, I'd die. If I try to take you out in any conventional sense, we're talking about extracting quantum information from a closed system. That violates thermodynamics. There's another way. The supervisor gestured, and the room's overlays shifted. Now Chris saw a fourth version, deeper, darker, where the forest itself was visible not as trees and moss, but as a network of connections, energy flowing in patterns that hurt to look at. The forest takes what dies here, but it can also release. If you understand the pattern, if you can see the whole of it, you can open the door. How? You already know. You documented it in your research. The places where space becomes fluid, they're nodes, connection points. If someone who understands the pattern places themselves at the right node at the right time, they can reset the loop. Collapse the waveform, in your terms. Chris felt his stomach drop. You're talking about sacrifice, about dying in a specific location to create a counter-pattern. We're talking about choice. The supervisor's form solidified slightly, became almost fully human. We didn't have a choice. The earthquake came, the mine collapsed, and we were trapped in the moment of our dying, stretched out over decades, aware but unable to move forward or back. You have a choice. You can walk away. You can leave this place and file a report that says Hannah Cortez died of exposure, that her body will probably never be found in the wilderness. Chris looked at Hannah. She sat at the desk, tears running down her face, shaking her head. Don't you dare sacrifice yourself for me. I'm already gone, Chris. Whatever they did to me, I'm part of it now. I can feel them in my head, all those voices. Just go. Tell my parents I wasn't scared at the end. Tell them I was doing research I loved. She's lying, the supervisor said. She's still separate, for now. But every hour she stays here, more of her merges with us. By morning, there won't be enough Hannah left to matter. You have until midnight. That's when the pattern resets, when the loop closes. After that, she's ours forever. Chris checked his watch. 19:23. 4.5 hours. His mind worked through the problem with the methodical precision that had earned him a doctorate and then made him unemployable. The entity wanted out. Hannah needed rescue. The forest operated on rules that bent physics but didn't break it entirely. There had to be a solution that didn't involve his death. "Show me the nodes," he said. "Show me the whole pattern." The supervisor smiled, and the room dissolved. Chris found himself standing in the forest, but seeing it differently. The trees glowed with lines of connection, energy flowing between them in precise geometric patterns. He could see the nodes, 7 of them, arranged in a rough circle around the mining camp. Each node pulsed with a different frequency, and together they formed a containment field that trapped information, prevented consciousness from dissipating. "You see," the supervisor said, now just a voice. 7 points. 7 anchors. The earthquake created them when it split the rock beneath this valley. The mine collapse charged them with death, with fear, with the energy of lives ending badly. Now they hold us. If I disrupt the pattern, we go free. All of us. The loop ends. Time moves forward. And Hannah goes free with us, returns to normal space-time, lives. Chris pulled out his GPS, marked the node locations as best he could, translate them back to conventional space. 3 of them were relatively close, within half a mile. The others were scattered across the valley. Hours of hiking apart in normal circumstances. He didn't have hours. "There's something you're not telling me," he said. "What happens to the pattern if I break it wrong? If I disrupt the wrong node first or damage the sequence?" Silence answered him. Then, reluctantly, the pattern collapses inward instead of releasing. Everything trapped here gets compressed, scattered, destroyed, including your Hannah. So I have to do it in the right order, and you're going to tell me that order. We don't know the order. The supervisor's voice held genuine frustration. We're part of the pattern, not above it. We can see it, but we can't read it. That requires someone outside, someone with the knowledge to interpret what they're seeing. Someone like you. Chris studied the pattern, his mind racing through everything he knew about quantum mechanics, about energy systems, about how information persisted in complex structures. The nodes formed a heptagon, irregular but deliberate. Energy flowed between them in a specific sequence. He could see it in the pulse patterns, the way each node lit up fractionally after the one before it. "It's a circuit," he said. "A closed loop. To break it, I need to interrupt the flow at the source, where the energy enters the system." He traced the pattern backward, following the pulses to their origin. "The mine, the actual collapse site, that's the source node." "Yes." The supervisor sounded surprised. "The tunnel entrance, specifically, where the earthquake struck first, where the first men died. That's where the pattern began." "Take me there." The forest shifted around him, and suddenly Chris stood before a hillside scarred with old timber framing. The mine entrance, sealed with rotting boards and warning signs dating back to the 1920s. Through gaps in the boards, he could see darkness that felt deeper than mere absence of light. Hannah appeared beside him, her form more solid now. "Chris, I don't like this. That place feels wrong, worse than anywhere else." "It's the source, the beginning and end of the loop." Chris approached the boards, tested them. They were more substantial than they looked. Not physical wood, but some kind of solidified psychic barrier. "They don't want anyone going in there. The entities, they're scared of this place." "Because going in there could collapse everything," Hannah said. "What if you're wrong about the order? What if disrupting the source node doesn't release the pattern? What if it just destroys it?" Chris turned to look at her. "Then I need more data. Hannah, you said you felt them in your head, all those voices. Can you still hear them?" "Yes, God, yes, they won't shut up." "What are they saying right now?" Hannah closed her eyes, concentrated. "They're arguing. Some of them want you to go in there. They think it's the only way. Others are terrified. They're saying the mine is where they went wrong, where the pattern became permanent. They're saying if you go in there, you might get trapped too. But some think it's the answer. The newer ones, the ones who died more recently. They say the pattern has been weakening over time, that more deaths have made it unstable. They think one more death, the right death in the right place, might overload the circuit, make it collapse outward instead of inward. Chris felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. How many deaths? How many people have disappeared in this area? They won't say, but I can feel. Chris, there are more than 37 of them now, a lot more. He checked his watch again. 20:47. 3 hours until midnight. I need to think. Chris pulled out his notebook, started writing equations. Energy in, energy out. Information preserved, information released. Entropy increasing, entropy decreasing. The pattern was a closed system, but closed systems could be opened. You just needed the right catalyst, the right input, or the right observer. Hannah, when you first encountered them, what exactly did they do? Walk me through it step by step. I was taking moss samples. I noticed one section that looked different, more geometric. I got closer and suddenly I heard voices. Not external, internal, in my head. They were asking for help, saying they were lost. I tried to respond, and that's when everything changed. The forest changed. I could see multiple versions of it at once, present day, and how it looked decades ago, and something else, something underneath. You interacted with the pattern, responded to it. That's what triggered your integration. Chris's mind assembled the pieces. It's like quantum observation. By acknowledging them, by trying to communicate, you became entangled with their information state. You're not being held prisoner. You're becoming part of the data structure. Can you speak like a person, please? You're turning into a ghost. Chris looked at her directly, but slowly. The process isn't instant, which means it can be interrupted. If I can separate your information pattern from theirs before midnight, you go back to normal. You become unentangled. And how do you do that? Chris looked at the sealed mine entrance. I go in there, I find the source of the pattern, and I observe it collapsing. That's insane. You said yourself you might get trapped. I might. But I'm betting the pattern needs conscious observation to maintain stability. The entities are trapped because they're part of what they're observing. Infinite loop. But I'm outside the loop. If I can observe the source while simultaneously disrupting it, I might be able to force the waveform to collapse in a specific direction. You're betting your life on quantum mechanics. I'm betting your life on quantum mechanics. Mine was already pretty mediocre. Chris managed a smile. Besides, if I'm wrong, we both get to be dead together. Some people would call that romantic. Some people would call it stupid. They've been calling me stupid for years. I'm used to it. Chris approached the mine entrance, started pulling away boards. They resisted, but eventually came free. The darkness beyond breathed cold air that smelled of earth and something else. Something like copper and fear. Hannah grabbed his arm. Chris, wait, if you do this, if you go in there and it works, what happens to them? All those people who've been trapped here? They get released. Their information pattern disperses back into normal entropy. They stop existing as conscious entities. They die. Really die. They're already dead. This is just ending the echo. Chris pulled out his headlamp, checked the battery. They've been suffering for 90 years, Hannah. Some of them want peace, and the ones who don't get a vote. Reality doesn't run on consensus. Chris stepped into the mine. The darkness was immediate and absolute, swallowing his headlamp beam after just a few feet. The tunnel had partially collapsed, but enough remained for him to move forward, hunched over, one hand on the rough wall. The temperature dropped with each step, and frost formed on the stone beneath his fingers. The voices started almost immediately. Dozens of them layered, speaking over each other. Some pleaded with him to turn back. Others urged him forward. A few just screamed. Chris kept moving, kept documenting in his head since he couldn't write in the dark. Tunnel approximately 7 feet high, 4 feet wide. Supports show signs of earthquake damage. Temperature approximately 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Auditory hallucinations consistent with consciousness field interaction. The tunnel branched. Chris pulled out his compass, watched the needle spin uselessly. The GPS was dead. He was navigating blind, following only intuition and the pull of something he couldn't name. He chose the left branch, kept walking. The voices grew louder, more desperate. He saw lights ahead, not real lights but ghostly illuminations that showed scenes from the past. Miners working, the moment of the earthquake, the ceiling falling, men running, screaming, dying. Chris walked through the visions, refusing to engage. Observation without interaction, the key to maintaining his separation from the pattern. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, and here the pattern became visible, not metaphorically, but actually visible. Lines of light networked through the space, connecting rocks, bones, objects. At the center, where the collapse had been worst, a vortex of energy spiraled slowly, drawing everything toward it. The source node. Chris approached carefully, studying the pattern. It was more complex than he'd thought, more beautiful and terrible. Information from dozens of deaths, all compressed and interconnected, forming a structure that was almost alive, almost conscious. "Hello, Christopher." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Not the supervisor, not any single entity. The pattern itself, speaking as a unified consciousness. "You came. We knew you would. You're too curious to resist. I'm here to end this. We know. The question is how. You could destroy us, disrupt the pattern violently, scatter us into entropy. Some of us want that. Some of us have been suffering too long." The vortex pulsed, and Chris saw faces in its light. Dozens, hundreds, cycling through expressions of pain and hope and despair. Or you could join us. Add your information pattern to ours. You're intelligent, aware. You could help us become more than we are. Help us evolve. Into what? Something new. Something that exists between life and death, between moment and eternity. You've always wanted to understand the universe's deeper patterns, Christopher. We could show you everything. Chris felt the pull of it, the seduction of infinite knowledge, of existing beyond normal constraints. He could learn things no living human had ever known. He could solve problems that haunted him. He could be with other minds that understood him. "No," he said quietly. "That's not understanding. That's just being trapped in a different way." "Then what will you do?" "You can't disrupt the pattern from inside it. You're already entangled. We can feel you, Christopher. Feel your thoughts, your fears, your loneliness. You're one of us now." Chris pulled out his notebook, opened it to the last page he'd written. The equation stared back at him, and he saw the flaw in his reasoning. The pattern was right. He couldn't disrupt it from inside. Observation required distance, objectivity. He'd lost that the moment he entered the mine. But Hannah hadn't. She was still outside, still separate enough to act. Chris pulled out his radio, prayed it would work. "Hannah, can you hear me?" Static answered, then her voice, faint and distorted. "Chris? Where are you?" "In the mine. Listen carefully. I need you to do exactly what I say." He looked at the vortex, calculated trajectories and energy distributions. "There are 7 nodes maintaining this pattern. I'm at the source node now, but I can't collapse it from here. I need you to disrupt the others, break the circuit." "How am I supposed to do that? I don't even know where they are." "You do. You're connected to the pattern now. You can feel them. Close your eyes and reach out with whatever sense they've given you. Find the other nodes." Silence. Then, "Oh God, I can see them. They're like stars in my head. 7 points of light." "Good. Now I need you to go to the closest one. When you get there, you're going to see a place where the energy concentrates. Probably a tree or a rock formation or something that stands out. You're going to observe it collapsing. Not imagine, observe. Watch it happen with absolute certainty that it's happening. Your observation will make it real." "Chris, that's insane." "It's quantum mechanics. Observation collapses probability into actuality. You're entangled with the pattern, which means your observation carries weight. You can force the outcome. He checked his watch. 22:15. You have until midnight. That's when the loop resets. Get to as many nodes as you can. Collapse them. Break the circuit. What about you? I'll collapse this one from inside. But Hannah, the moment you start disrupting the nodes, the entities are going to panic. They're going to try to stop you. They'll show you things, tell you things, try to convince you to stop. Don't listen. Stay focused on the task. I'm scared. Me too. But you're a scientist. You understand observation, measurement, data. Trust your training. Trust yourself. Chris, go. Now. The radio went silent. Chris stood alone in the chamber, facing the vortex. The pattern's consciousness swirled around him, angry now, frightened. You're killing us, it said. All of us. The innocent along with the guilty. The ones who want peace along with the ones who want to live. Is that justice? No, Chris admitted. But it's mercy. You've been suffering for 90 years. It's time to stop. We could stop without dying. We could find another way. Give us time. You've had 90 years. Chris approached the vortex, reached out toward it. His hand passed into the light, and agony shot up his arm. Not physical pain, but the sensation of his consciousness touching something vast and terrible. I'm sorry, I really am. But this ends now. He closed his eyes and observed, not the vortex as it was, but as it could be, dissipating, releasing, letting go. He held that image in his mind with absolute certainty, with every ounce of focus he possessed. This is happening. This is real. The pattern is collapsing. The vortex screamed. Energy erupted through the chamber, and Chris felt his consciousness pulled in multiple directions at once. He existed in the mine and outside it, in the present and the past, alive and dying and something in between. The pattern tried to integrate him, to make him part of its eternal moment, but he held on to his observation, collapsing, releasing, ending. Somewhere outside, Hannah was doing the same. He could feel her, sense her moving between nodes, each one disrupted, sending shockwaves through the pattern. The circuit was breaking. The loop was opening. One more node, just one more. Chris pushed deeper into the vortex, let it envelop him completely. He could see the individual consciousnesses now, the 37 original miners plus dozens more, hikers, campers, researchers, all trapped over the decades. Some fought against the collapse, terrified of the void that waited. Others welcomed it, ready for the end. He observed them all finding peace, observed the pattern releasing them, observed entropy increasing, information dispersing, consciousness returning to the natural order. The vortex collapsed. Reality snapped back like a rubber band, and Chris found himself on his knees in the chamber, gasping for air. The lights were gone. The pattern was gone. Around him lay only rock and darkness and the natural silence of a dead mine. His radio crackled. Chris, I did it. I hit all 7 nodes. They're gone. The forest feel normal. Are you okay? Chris tried to respond, but his voice wouldn't work. Something was wrong. He could feel it, a hollowness inside, an absence where something used to be. The pattern had taken something from him when it collapsed, carved out a piece of his consciousness and scattered it with the rest. He would live, but he wouldn't be entirely himself anymore. Chris, please answer me. He forced his mouth to work. I'm here. I'm coming out. Chris stumbled through the tunnel, following the faint light of the entrance. Dawn was breaking. He'd been in the mine all night, though it had felt like minutes. He emerged into the Hoh rainforest, and everything looked exactly as it should. Normal trees, normal moss, normal October morning light filtering through the canopy. Hannah stood waiting, flanked by a full search team. Johnson was there, and 3 other rangers and 2 paramedics with a stretcher. They rushed forward when they saw him, began checking his vitals, asking questions he only half heard. The woman? He managed to ask Johnson. Hannah Cortez? Right here, Brennan. She walked into the station about an hour ago, said you were in the mine and needed help. We've been looking for you ever since." Chris turned to look at Hannah. She met his eyes, and he saw the truth in them. She remembered everything, but she would never tell anyone because who would believe it? "Did we?" she started to ask, then stopped. "Is it over?" Chris nodded. "It's over. They're gone." Later, after the medical evaluations and debriefings and incident reports, after the search team packed up and returned to the station, Chris found Hannah sitting by the Hoh River, staring at the water. "I can't feel them anymore," she said as he approached. "The voices are gone. It's just me in my head now. It should feel like relief, but mostly it just feels empty." Chris sat beside her. He understood. They were people, trapped and suffering, but still people. We killed them in a sense. We set them free. Maybe it's the same thing. They sat in silence for a while, watching the river flow. Finally, Hannah spoke again. "What happened to you in there? In the mine? You seem different." Chris considered lying, but she deserved the truth. "The pattern took something. I'm not sure what exactly. Some part of my ability to connect, maybe, or to feel certain emotions. I don't know yet. I'll figure it out over time. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was worth it." He pulled out his notebook, looked at the equations and observations he'd written. "I have data now. Proof. Documentation of something no one else has ever properly recorded. I can write it up, publish it. Maybe someone will finally listen. They won't." Hannah's voice was gentle but firm. "You know they won't. It's too far outside acceptable frameworks. Too impossible." "I know." Chris closed the notebook. "But I'll document it anyway, because that's what I do." Hannah stood, brushed off her jeans. "I have to get back to Seattle. My parents are losing their minds, but Chris, thank you for not leaving me there, for believing me when I said I was still separate. You were worth saving." She smiled, started to leave, then turned back. "The forest feels normal now. But do you think it really is? Or did we just close one door while leaving others open?" Chris looked out at the Hoh rainforest, at the ancient trees and endless moss and shadows that moved in ways shadows shouldn't. He thought about the other disappearances, the other mysteries, the other places where reality grew thin. "I think the forest has always been strange," he said finally. "We just exposed one part of it. There are other parts, deeper parts, and someday someone else will find them. Will you keep looking?" "Always." Hannah nodded, understanding in her eyes. Then she walked away down the trail, and Chris was alone with the forest and his thoughts and the hollow place where part of him used to be. He pulled out his notebook and began to write. Year 2014. Location: Hoh River Valley, Olympic National Park. Subject: collective consciousness phenomenon and spatial temporal anomaly. Documentation of a closed time-like curve resulting from seismic event and multiple traumatic deaths, subsequently disrupted through observer intervention. The forest rustled around him, and for just a moment, Chris thought he heard voices in the wind. Not the tortured voices of the trapped, but something else. Something older. Something that had been here long before the miners, long before the forest itself. He looked up at the canopy, at the way light filtered through branches that seemed to exist in multiple places at once, and he understood with terrible clarity that what they'd ended was just one pattern among many. The Hoh rainforest held secrets that went deeper than quantum mechanics or consciousness theory. It held realities that shouldn't exist, spaces between spaces, moments folded into other moments. And now that he'd seen one, he would inevitably see others. Chris closed his notebook and stood. The other rangers would be wondering where he was. He had reports to file, evidence to log, lies to tell that would make his observations palatable to bureaucracy. He would write up Hannah's rescue as exposure and disorientation, his own injuries as a fall in the mine. The truth would go in his personal files, unread and unbelieved. He started down the trail toward the ranger station, and with each step the forest seemed to settle around him, accepting his presence. He'd become something different during that long night. Not entirely human anymore, but not trapped either. He existed in the space between, able to see patterns others couldn't, cursed with knowledge that isolated him. But isolation was familiar. Understanding was what mattered. The Ho River rushed beside the trail, and in its sound Chris heard the echo of all the voices that had cried out for release. They were gone now, scattered into entropy, at peace in oblivion. Only he and Hannah would remember them. Only they would carry the weight of what had been done. It was enough. Chris walked on through the forest, and the forest watched him go. And somewhere in the deep places where reality folded back on itself, new patterns were already forming. New loops, new traps, new mysteries waiting for someone curious enough and foolish enough to investigate. He would find them. He always did. That's what it meant to be the cartographer of lost things, to map the places where the world came undone, and to pay the price for that knowledge. The forest had taken something from him, but it had also given him purpose. In the end, perhaps that was a fair trade. Thank you for reading to the end. If you appreciated this narrative, consider following for more engaging stories. What's your interpretation of what Chris lost in the mine? I'd love to read your theories in the comments. Great Smoky Mountains National Park, Tennessee. September 19, 2015. Benjamin Carver had learned to trust the silence. Not the obvious kind, the held breath quiet before a thunderstorm or the muffled hush of fresh snowfall. Those were amateur silences, the ones every hiker and weekend camper recognized. Ben trusted the other kind, the silence that shouldn't exist. The absence of birdsong at noon, the way sound seemed to bend around certain sections of trail, as if the forest itself had decided to stop listening. He'd been stationed at the Klingman's Dome Ranger Post for 11 years, knew every switchback of the 32 miles under his jurisdiction, knew which hemlock groves still held winter's cold in July, which ridgelines caught the thermals that carried voices up from the valleys below, knew too which places felt wrong in ways that had nothing to do with topography or weather patterns. The Forney Ridge Trail was one of those places. Ben stood at marker 4-2, adjusting the straps on his pack, when he first saw the family. Standard configuration, harried mother, distracted father, 2 kids. The older boy, maybe 10, was absorbed in a handheld gaming device that definitely wouldn't have reception up here. The younger one, a girl with copper-colored hair pulled into 2 braids, crouched near the trail's edge, arranging pine cones into some pattern only she understood. "Stay where I can see you, Harper," the mother called, not really watching. She was arguing with her husband about whether they'd brought enough water. Ben had seen this scene 1,000 times. Families treating the wilderness like an extension of their suburban backyard. He should have walked over, done his friendly ranger routine, mentioned that the afternoon fog would settle in within the hour, and maybe they should turn back. He started to. Got within 20 feet when Harper looked up at him and smiled. It wasn't a child's smile. Too knowing. Too sad. Then she stood and walked off the trail, into the thick understory of rhododendron and mountain laurel, moving with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested she knew exactly where she was going. "Harper!" The mother's scream cut through the afternoon. "Harper!" Ben was already moving, crashing through the undergrowth, radio in hand. "This is Ranger Carver. I have a child off trail at Forney Ridge, marker 4.2. Female, approximately 8 years old, last seen heading northeast into the laurel thicket." His boots found no path through the dense vegetation. Branches whipped his face. He could hear the mother's sobbing behind him, the father's voice rising in panic, but ahead, nothing. No sound of a child pushing through brush, no glimpse of that copper hair. Ben stopped, listened. The silence pressed against his eardrums. He'd been here before. Not physically, though he knew this section of forest, but here, in this moment where the world stopped making sense. 5 years ago. Different trail, different child. Same impossible absence. His hand shook as he keyed the radio again. "Dispatch, I need search and rescue at Forney Ridge. We have a missing child, 8-year-old female named Harper." He realized he didn't know her last name. Last seen at 14:47 hours. Request immediate air support and ground teams. The crackle of static felt like company. Copy that, Ranger Carver. Mobilizing SAR Team Alpha. ETA 45 minutes. Do you have visual on the subject? Ben looked at the wall of green ahead. The fog was starting to roll in, weeks earlier than it should. Through the gray-white tendrils, something moved. Small, child-sized. Negative, he said, but I'm in pursuit. He pushed forward, marking his path with orange surveyor's tape every 30 feet. Standard protocol. The undergrowth thinned after 20 yards, opening into one of those unexpected clearings that dotted the Smokies, spaces where lightning strikes or disease had cleared the canopy decades ago, creating islands of meadow in an ocean of trees. Harper stood in the center, her back to him, still as a photograph. Relief crashed through Ben's chest. Harper, honey, your mom is really worried about you. Let's head back to the trail, okay? She didn't turn around. Harper, I can't find my way home, she said. Her voice sounded strange, distant, as if she were speaking from the bottom of a well. I've been looking for so long. Ben approached slowly, hands visible, using his gentle voice, the one he'd practiced after the incident 5 years ago. In therapy sessions he'd stopped attending after 6 months because talking about it made it more real. It's okay. I know the way. I'll take you back to your parents. My parents are looking for me, Harper said. They've been looking for such a long time. Something in Ben's gut twisted. He was close enough now to see that her clothes were wrong. Not the REI brand hiking gear he'd glimpsed on the trail, but older, simpler. A yellow cotton dress with white flowers. No jacket, though the temperature had dropped into the low 50s. Harper, are you cold? She turned around. The face was Harper's. Same copper hair, same dusting of freckles, same gap between her front teeth. But the eyes were different. Ancient and lost, and filled with a longing so profound it seemed to pull at something inside Ben's chest. Do you know the way? She asked. Ben's throat constricted. His radio crackled, dispatch trying to reach him, but he couldn't tear his gaze away from those eyes. Harper, what's your last name? I don't remember anymore. I forgot a lot of things, but I remember I need to go home. She took a step toward him. Can you help me? Please? The fog thickened, curling around them like smoke. Ben could no longer see the edge of the clearing. His GPS unit beeped, low battery, which made no sense. He'd charged it that morning. The compass on his wrist spun lazily, unable to find north. Where? His voice cracked. He tried again. Where is home, Harper? She pointed into the fog. That way. I can almost remember. Sometimes I see it, but when I get close, it disappears. And then I have to start looking all over again. Ben's radio screamed static. Through it, distorted and far away, he heard voices. The SAR team, probably, but they sounded wrong. Too distant, as if they were calling from another world entirely. Ranger Carver, do you copy? We're at marker 4.2. No sign of you or the child. Please respond. He keyed the radio. I'm in a clearing approximately 200 yards northeast of the marker. I have the subject with me. Negative, Ranger Carver. We have eyes on that area. It's empty. Please confirm your position. The fog pressed closer. Harper watched him with those terrible, ancient eyes. Ben looked around. The trees at the clearing's edge had changed. They were hemlocks now, not the oaks and maples that dominated this elevation. And they were dead. Gray skeletons wrapped in kudzu, strangled years ago by the adelgid infestation that had swept through in the early 2000s. But he'd walked through this area last month. The hemlocks here were healthy, treated with insecticide, part of the park's preservation effort. Ranger Carver, respond. We're showing your GPS signal, but it's not moving. Are you mobile? Harper held out her hand. I'm scared of being alone, she whispered. Will you help me find the way? Ben looked at her hand. Small, pale, fingers slightly curled, as if she'd been clutching something for so long she'd forgotten how to let go. 5 years ago, a boy named Marcus, 12 years old, separated from his scout troop on the Appalachian Trail connector. Ben had found him at dusk, standing on the ridge overlooking the Fontana Lake Basin, staring at something in the valley below. Marcus had turned to Ben and said, "Do you see them? They're waiting for me." Ben had reached for the boy's arm. Marcus had stepped backward off the ridge into 200 feet of empty air. By the time the recovery team reached the bottom, they found Marcus's body wedged between two boulders, neck broken, eyes open, and fixed on some distant point no one else could see. The investigation cleared Ben. Tragic accident, disoriented child. But Ben knew better. He'd seen Marcus's face in that last moment. Not fear, recognition, as if he'd finally found what he'd been looking for. Ben had spent 5 years trying to convince himself he'd imagined the shapes in the valley. The figures Marcus had been watching, the way they'd seemed to welcome him. Now, standing in a clearing that shouldn't exist, looking at a child wearing clothes from another decade, Ben understood that he'd been chosen for this. Whatever had taken Marcus had been waiting for him to return. "How long have you been lost, Harper?" he asked softly. She tilted her head, considering. "A long time. Since the fog came. Mommy said to stay close, but I saw something pretty. A bird, I think. Blue. I followed it and then..." She trailed off, confusion crossing her face. "Then I couldn't find the path anymore, and everyone disappeared." "What year is it, Harper?" 1987, she said without hesitation. "July. We came for my birthday. I'm 7 now." Pride in her voice, the way children wear their ages like badges of honor. Ben's hands went numb. "Harper, I need you to listen to me very carefully. The year is 2015. You've been..." The words stuck in his throat. How do you tell a child she's been dead for 28 years? But she was nodding, a terrible understanding dawning in those ancient eyes. "I know," she whispered. "Sometimes I know, but then I forget again. And I keep looking. I can't stop looking." The radio crackled. "Ranger Carver, this is Captain Morrison with SAR Alpha. Your signal is degrading. We're sending a team to your last known position. If you can hear this, stay where you are." Ben looked at the wall of fog surrounding them. "Harper, the other Harper, the one in the yellow dress from today, where is she?" The ghost child smiled sadly. "She followed me, like you're following me now, because I need someone to help me find the way. I can't do it alone anymore. I tried, but I keep getting lost." "You're not lost," Ben said. His voice was steadier than he felt. "You died, Harper. You died 28 years ago, and you need to stop taking people with you." She looked at him with an expression so heartbreaking it made his chest ache. "But I'm scared. It's so dark when I'm alone. And cold. If someone comes with me, maybe we can find the way together. Maybe if there are enough of us, we won't be scared anymore." Ben thought of Marcus, thought of the 6 other disappearances in this section of the park over the past 3 decades, the ones that had never been solved, bodies never recovered, hikers who'd simply vanished into the fog and never came back. "How many?" he asked. "I don't remember their names anymore, but they're waiting. They're all waiting for me to find the way so they can go home too." The fog began to thin. Through it, Ben saw shapes, figures standing at the clearing's edge. A teenager in 1990s flannel, an elderly man in vintage camping gear, a young woman in running clothes, and there, copper hair in 2 braids, yellow dress, today's Harper, standing hand in hand with her ghost. They were all watching him, waiting. Ben's radio crackled one more time. "Ranger Carver, we have a situation. The missing child, Harper Reeves, her mother is saying she saw her daughter disappear with a ranger. A male ranger fitting your description. She's claiming you took Harper into the woods. Please respond immediately." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. To the family on the trail, he hadn't been pursuing their daughter. He'd been leading her away. And now, in this place between worlds, he understood. Harper, the ghost, didn't appear to her victims. She appeared as them, a mirror, a lure, drawing in anyone who tried to help. And Ben had done exactly what she needed. Followed, pursued, crossed whatever threshold separated the living world from this gray space where the lost ones gathered. "I can help you," Ben said slowly. The figures at the clearing's edge leaned forward, hopeful. "But not by following you deeper." Young Harper shook her head frantically. "No, you have to come. You have to help me find—" "The way isn't forward," Ben interrupted. "It's back. Back to where you started. Back to the last moment before you stepped off the trail." "I tried going back," Harper said, her voice rising to a childish wail. "But I can't find it. Everything looks the same. The trees and the fog and the paths that go nowhere. Because you're not looking for the right thing." Ben dropped to one knee, bringing himself to her eye level. Behind him, he could hear sounds from the real world. Helicopter rotors, voices calling his name, the organized chaos of a search operation. "Harper, what did your mother look like?" The ghost child blinked. I don't..." "Try, please. What color were her eyes?" "I don't remember." "Her voice. What did it sound like when she called your name?" Harper's face crumpled. "I can't. It's been too long, I forgot." "Then remember this." Ben pulled out his phone. No signal, but the photos still worked. He scrolled to the image he'd taken an hour ago. Harper Reeves alive, crouching on the trail, arranging pine cones. He held it out. "This is Harper, 8 years old. Her mother's name is Christine. Her father is David. She has a brother named Tyler who ignores her because he's at that age where little sisters are embarrassing. She's real, Harper. She's alive. And she's not supposed to be here." The ghost child stared at the photo. Her face, both faces, the 7-year-old and the current victim, flickered like bad reception. "You're not helping her by keeping her," Ben continued. "You're stealing her life, taking her from everyone who loves her. Is that what you want? To do to someone else what was done to you?" "I'm just so lonely," Harper whispered, and for the first time she sounded like what she truly was. A terrified child who'd been lost in the dark for longer than most people lived. Ben's radio crackled. Through the static he heard, "Thermal imaging shows 2 heat signatures in grid 7 Delta. Moving in." The fog was thinning faster now. The figures at the clearing's edge were fading, their features becoming indistinct. But Harper, both Harpers, remained solid. "I know you're lonely," Ben said gently. "I know you're scared. But Harper, the real way home isn't here. It never was. You need to stop looking and start letting go." "I don't know how," she sobbed. Ben extended his hand, not to take hers, but open, offering a choice. "The people who love you, Harper Calloway." The name came to him from nowhere, or from everywhere, from the forest itself. "They never stopped looking. Your parents, your grandparents, they searched for you until they died. They're waiting for you, but not here, not in the fog, not in the in-between." Young Harper's eyes widened. "Calloway," she repeated. That's my name. Harper Elizabeth Calloway." "Yes. I'm from Asheville. Mommy teaches piano. Daddy works at the plant. I have a dog named Biscuit." The memories were coming faster now, color returning to her translucent face. I remember the bird. It wasn't blue. It was a butterfly, a swallowtail. I followed it off the trail, just for a second, but the fog came and I couldn't find my way back." "You can now," Ben said, "if you let go, if you stop holding on to the others." Harper looked at the figures around the clearing. They were almost invisible now, but Ben could feel their presence, their hope, their desperate wish to finally be found. "Will it hurt?" Harper asked. "I don't know," Ben admitted. "But it has to be better than being lost forever." She studied his face for a long moment. Then she smiled, a real child's smile this time, innocent and trusting. okay. She closed her eyes. The fog lifted like a curtain. Ben was kneeling in an empty clearing, not the one he'd been in moments before, but a real place, identifiable on his map. Grid 7 Delta, 300 yards from Forney Ridge Trail. His GPS signal jumped to life, showing his exact coordinates. The compass on his wrist pointed steadily north, and 10 feet away, curled up against the base of an oak tree, was Harper Reeves. The real one, alive. She blinked up at him, confusion in her eyes. "I had the strangest dream," she murmured. "There was another girl. She looked like me. She said she'd show me something pretty if I followed her." Ben gathered the child in his arms as the SR team burst through the tree line. They were shouting coordinates, calling for medics, but all Ben could hear was Harper's steady breathing against his chest. Alive. Warm. Real. "Ranger Carver." Captain Morrison stopped short, staring. "How the hell? Your signal was degraded, we thought." "I found her," Ben said simply. Later, after Harper was reunited with her sobbing parents, after the incident reports were filed and the medical examinations completed, mild dehydration, minor scratches, no serious injuries, Ben sat alone in his office at the ranger station. The sun had set hours ago. The mountains were dark shapes against a darker sky. His computer screen glowed with search results. It hadn't been hard to find. Harper Elizabeth Calloway, age 7, disappeared July 12, 1987, during a family camping trip to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Extensive search conducted. Body never recovered. Case remained open for 15 years before being officially closed. He scrolled down to the family photos. Harper Calloway smiled out from the screen, gap-toothed and bright-eyed, wearing a yellow dress with white flowers. Behind her, a woman who looked tired but proud. A man with kind eyes. A golden retriever. The obituary for Harper's mother, dated 2008, mentioned that she'd been predeceased by her beloved daughter Harper, who passed away in 1987. They are reunited at last. Ben closed the browser window. His radio crackled. "Carver, you still there?" "Yeah, Morrison. What's up?" "Just wanted to say good work today. The Reeves family is beyond grateful. The mother specifically asked me to thank you. She said when Harper woke up, she told them that a ranger and another little girl helped her find her way back." Ben's throat tightened. "Just doing my job." "Well, you did it damn well. Get some rest. You've earned it." The radio clicked off. Ben stood and walked to the window. The fog was rolling in across the ridgeline, thick and white and impenetrable. Somewhere in those mountains, trails wound through ancient forests, and somewhere he hoped Harper Elizabeth Calloway had finally found her way home. He thought about the others, the figures he'd seen in the clearing, the ones Harper had been collecting, trying to build herself a family in the fog. He wondered if they'd been released too, or if they were still out there waiting. Tomorrow, he decided, he'd request the files on the other disappearances, cross-reference dates and locations, see if there were patterns. Because whatever had happened today, whatever impossible thing he'd witnessed, it meant one thing. The forest held more than trees and stone. It held the lost, the forgotten, and maybe, with enough time and patience, some of them could still be found. Ben pulled his jacket from the chair and headed for the door. Outside, the night air smelled like pine and coming rain. He took a breath, held it, released it slowly. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Another answered. The silence between them felt like peace. Thank you for reading to the end. If you appreciated this narrative, consider following for more immersive stories that explore the boundaries between our world and what lies beyond. What's your interpretation of what Ben truly experienced in that clearing? Was Harper Calloway's spirit real, or was it something else entirely drawing lost souls together? I'd love to read your theories in the comments. Daniel Carter had been with Olympic National Park Search and Rescue for 19 years, and in that time he'd learned to trust patterns. Weather patterns, behavior patterns, statistical probabilities. He'd found lost hikers by calculating their most likely trajectory based on terrain difficulty and human psychology. He'd located injured climbers by analyzing equipment failure rates in accident hotspots. Math and logic had never failed him, until October 17, 2014, when Sofia Martinez disappeared. The morning air carried the dense, wet smell of cedar and decomposing vegetation as Daniel led his 4-person team deeper into the Hoh rainforest. Sofia had been missing for 36 hours. She'd gone out on a solo wildlife photography expedition, tracking Roosevelt elk, she'd said, and never returned to the trailhead where her Subaru still sat, keys locked inside. Standard protocol suggested she'd either injured herself or gotten disoriented in the forest's labyrinthine interior, where the canopy grew so thick that GPS signals died and compasses spun lazily in confused circles. "Ground's too soft," Marcus Hayes muttered beside him, examining a depression that might have been a footprint or might have been nothing. Marcus was young, 26, still learning to read the forest. "Can't get a clear track." Daniel knelt, his knees protesting the movement. At 41, he felt every year spent hauling equipment through Olympics' unforgiving terrain. He studied the depression with his usual methodical attention. The Olympics received 12 feet of rain annually, turning the earth into a sponge that swallowed evidence. But there was something here, a partial heel print maybe, oriented northwest. "She went this way," he said, standing and adjusting his pack. The GPS unit on his chest read the coordinates, but the canopy interference made it nearly useless. They were navigating by compass, topographic map, and Daniel's accumulated knowledge of the park's 1,242 square miles. They found Sofia's first camera 3 hours later. It was a Nikon D800, professional grade, worth $3,000. It sat propped against a moss-covered nurse log as if someone had carefully placed it there. The lens was shattered, but the body was intact. Daniel's analytical mind immediately cataloged the wrongness. Sofia wouldn't have abandoned expensive equipment. She wouldn't have positioned it so deliberately, and she certainly wouldn't have continued without it. "Could have dropped it running," suggested Amy Chen, their medical specialist. "Then it would be face down in the mud," Daniel replied, pulling on latex gloves before touching the camera. He pressed the power button. Nothing. The battery compartment was empty. He checked the SD card slot. Also empty. Marcus was already scanning the surrounding area with his handheld radio. "Sofia, this is Olympic SAR. Do you copy?" Static hissed back. "Sofia Martinez, if you can hear this, we've found your equipment. Please respond." The forest absorbed his words without echo. Daniel had always found the Hoh rainforest oppressive. The way the Sitka spruce grew so tall and dense that only green-tinted twilight penetrated even at noon. The way moss draped everything like funeral shrouds. The way sounds died within feet of their source. But he'd never felt it quite like this, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. They found the second camera 40 minutes later, positioned identically on another log. This one still had its battery, though the SD card was missing. Daniel turned it on and scrolled through the remaining images. Elk, trees, more elk. A selfie of Sofia smiling, her dark hair pulled back, Olympic National Park emblem visible on her jacket. Then several dozen photos of absolutely nothing. Just darkness, as if she'd been clicking the shutter without looking, or in the middle of the night without flash. The last photo made Daniel's scalp prickle. It was taken at night, definitely, but something had provided illumination. The image showed the forest at an impossible angle, as if the camera had been lying on the ground pointing upward. Tree trunks receded into darkness. And there, barely visible in the upper right corner, was a pale shape that might have been a face or might have been a trick of light and shadow. The metadata said it was taken at 2:47 a.m. on October 16th, approximately 7 hours before Sofia's expected return. "Why would she be shooting in the middle of the night?" Amy asked, looking over his shoulder. Daniel didn't answer. He was thinking about equipment batteries, about rational explanations, but his 19 years of experience was whispering something else, something he didn't want to acknowledge. People didn't arrange their own equipment in neat displays while lost and panicking. They made camp as dusk fell, standard procedure when losing daylight. Daniel insisted on full protocols: bear-proof food storage, perimeter checks, radio contact with base every hour. Marcus seemed jumpy, starting at every sound, but that was normal for the Olympics at night. The forest came alive after dark with sounds that triggered primal hindbrain responses: the screech of owls, the crack of branches, the occasional distant howl of coyotes from the river valley. Daniel was updating his log when he heard Sophia's voice. "Help me." He was on his feet instantly, flashlight sweeping the perimeter. "Sophia." "Over here," her voice came again from the northeast, distant but clear. "I'm hurt. Please help me." Marcus and Amy were scrambling from their tents. "You heard that?" Marcus asked. "Northeast, maybe 200 yards," Daniel said, already moving. His analytical mind was processing. Voice carried differently at night. She could be closer or farther, but she was alive. That was what mattered. "Wait." Amy grabbed his arm. "Something's wrong. She's hurt. We need to—" "Listen to the voice," Amy insisted. "Really listen." Daniel stopped. Sophia called again. "Help me, I'm hurt. Please help me." The exact same words, the exact same inflection, like a recording. "It's just echo distortion," Daniel said, but his certainty was cracking. "Sound bounces weird here. Help me, I'm hurt. Please help me." Again, identical. They stood in tense silence. The voice didn't call again. Daniel's radio crackled, base checking in right on schedule. He gave his report mechanically, not mentioning the voice. What would he say? "We heard someone who sounded like the missing person but might not have been." It violated every rule of his logical approach. They took turns on watch. Daniel couldn't sleep anyway, his mind working through scenarios. Audio hallucination from exhaustion. Possible but unlikely. All three of them heard it. Another hiker coincidentally calling for help? The Olympics were vast and empty this time of year. A recording, played to lure them? By whom and why? He didn't want to think about the other possibility, the one that had no rational explanation. At 2:47 a.m. exactly, Daniel noticed the time, the same timestamp as Sophia's last photo. The screaming started. It was Sophia's voice, absolutely her voice, but making sounds no human throat should produce. Oscillating shrieks that rose and fell in waves, punctuated by clicking noises like someone rapidly opening and closing their jaw. The sound came from multiple directions simultaneously, impossible unless there were speakers hidden throughout the forest, and Daniel's rational mind was building that theory even as his hindbrain screamed at him to run. The screaming stopped as suddenly as it began. Morning came with fog so thick Daniel could barely see 10 feet. They found Sophia's backpack at dawn, hanging from a branch 12 feet off the ground. Marcus had to climb to retrieve it. Inside, her phone, dead battery, no SD card, a water bottle, energy bars, and a small leather journal Daniel had never seen before. The journal's first entries were normal field notes about elk behavior, weather observations, campsite locations. Then, starting on October 15th, the handwriting changed, became erratic. The entries stopped making sense. "It's not an elk. I thought it was an elk, but it's not. The legs bend wrong. It was watching me from across the creek. It smiled. Do elk smile? I know they don't, but I saw it smile. 3 times now I've heard my mother calling me. My mother died in 2009. I know this. I know this. But it sounds exactly like her. Even the way she used to say my name when I was in trouble. Sophia Elena Martinez, full name, that specific tone. How does it know? Found tracks. 5-toed like human, but the stride is wrong. 7 feet between prints. Maybe more. I measured. I'm not crazy, I measured. It's wearing someone's skin. That's what the old man at Forks told me, remember? I didn't believe him. Don't go into the deep forest alone, he said. The Yi Naldlushi walks there. I laughed. I actually laughed at him. Traditional Navajo stories in Washington state. I thought that was so strange. He said they go wherever they want. They're not bound by territory. They put on animal skins and they walk, he said, And sometimes they wear human skins too, and you can't tell the difference until it's too late. The final entry was barely legible. It's pretending to be me. I heard my own voice calling from the dark. It's learning. It's been following me for 2 days, and it's learning how to be me. What if it goes back instead of me? What if everyone thinks it's me? Daniel, if you're reading this, you will be, won't you? Because you're the one who finds people. Please, don't trust anything that looks like me. Check the eyes. He said, check the eyes. Daniel read the entry 3 times. His hands were shaking. 19 years of search and rescue had taught him that missing people often experienced psychological breaks. Exhaustion, dehydration, hypothermia, they all caused hallucinations and paranoia. Sophia had panicked, let traditional folklore prey on her fears, and now she was out here somewhere genuinely hurt and terrified because her own mind had turned against her. That was the rational explanation. We need to find her today, he said firmly. She's experiencing severe psychological distress. But Amy was staring at the journal entry, her face pale. My grandmother was Kino, she said quietly. Grew up on the res before she married out. She used to tell stories about things in the Olympics, things that weren't animals and weren't human, things that imitated. Folklore, Daniel said. Folklore usually comes from somewhere. They found the elk at noon. It was a massive Roosevelt bull, 600 pounds easily, lying on its side in a small clearing. Daniel approached cautiously. Injured elk were dangerous, but this one was dead. Recently dead, still warm, and it had been positioned. Its legs were folded underneath it in a way that was almost human, almost kneeling. Its head was turned at an unnatural angle, neck clearly broken, positioned to face the direction they'd been hiking. And carved into the hide of its flank, in neat, precise letters, were the words, "Help me." Marcus vomited into the ferns. Amy was backing away, hand over her mouth. Daniel stood perfectly still, his analytical mind frantically trying to process this through the lens of logic. Someone had done this, a person, a disturbed person maybe, someone playing a sick game, or... The elk's eye moved. Daniel jerked backward, heart hammering. No, impossible. The animal was dead. He could see the stillness of its chest, the way its tongue lolled from its mouth. The eye moved again, rolling to fix on him. Then the elk's mouth opened, jaw working, and Sophia's voice emerged. Daniel, why won't you help me? He was running. Logic and training and 19 years of experience all dissolved in the face of that impossible sight, and Daniel Carter ran. He heard Marcus and Amy crashing through the undergrowth behind him, heard his own breathing ragged in his ears, heard Sophia's voice from ahead. This way, hurry! He stopped so abruptly Amy collided with him. The voice was coming from the direction they were fleeing. He spun around. The voice called from behind them now. Daniel, I'm here. Then from the left. Why are you running from me? From the right. I'm so cold. From above. I've been waiting. Multiple Sophias, surrounding them, and Daniel's mind was fracturing, trying to fit this into any framework that made sense. Recordings. Speakers. Multiple people. A coordinated group trying to... Something moved in the canopy. He saw it for perhaps 2 seconds before it vanished back into the dense foliage, long-limbed and pale, moving on all fours along a branch that should have been too narrow to support it. Naked, he thought, or wearing something that looked like skin. Its head turned toward him, and he saw a face that was almost human but not quite. Proportions slightly wrong, mouth too wide. It smiled at him. He would remember that smile forever, the way it spread past where human lips should end. And then it was gone. What is it? Marcus was whispering over and over. What is it? What is it? What is it? Daniel's radio crackled. Sophia's voice emerged from the speaker. Daniel Carter, come find me. Come see what I am. He should call for extraction. He should get his team out immediately. That was protocol, but his analytical mind, even while crumbling, held one terrible certainty. Whatever was out here, it knew them now. It knew their names and voices and faces, and if they left without understanding what it was, without documenting it, without following some kind of rational procedure. He realized he was still trying to fit this into a search and rescue framework, trying to make it make sense. "We set up a defensible position," he heard himself say. "Document everything. Wait for daylight. Follow protocol." The words were automatic, a lifeline to sanity. They found a small depression surrounded by fallen logs and backed by a cliff face. Only 3 approaches. They arranged their equipment with shaking hands. Daniel's phone still had battery. He took photos of everything: the journal, the coordinates, the forest around them. Evidence, data, things that could be analyzed. As darkness fell, they heard Sophia singing. It was a song Daniel recognized from the office. Sophia humming while she processed photos, some pop song about summer and beaches. The voice came from the forest, moving in slow circles around their position. Sometimes close, sometimes distant. Always that same fragment of melody, looping endlessly. "The Navajo traditional stories," Amy whispered. "They say the Yi Naldlushi are witches who violated the deepest taboos. They killed someone close to them, a sibling usually, and performed dark rituals. The spirits cursed them, transformed them. They can take animal shapes, but they always return to something that looks human. And they hunger." "For what?" Marcus asked. "Identity. They wear skins to steal identities. Some stories say they eat their victims and take their place. Others say they just need to study you long enough, learn your voice and mannerisms, and then..." She trailed off. Daniel wanted to dismiss it as folklore, but he kept seeing that smile, those wrong proportions, the way it had moved. "This is Washington State," he said, voice hoarse. "Skinwalkers are southwestern. Navajo territory is 1,000 miles south." Sophia's journal mentioned an old man telling her they walk wherever they want. Amy replied. What if they do? What if they're not bound by geography? What if they just walk, finding new hunting grounds? The singing stopped. In the sudden silence, they heard footsteps, something large, moving through the undergrowth with the slow deliberation of a predator that knew its prey was trapped. Then Sophia walked into their clearing. She looked exactly as Daniel remembered. Olive skin, dark hair in a practical ponytail, Olympic National Park jacket, hiking boots. She was smiling, holding up one hand in greeting. "Oh, thank God," she said. "I've been looking everywhere for you guys. I got so turned around." Every instinct in Daniel's body screamed wrong. "Sophia," he said carefully, "how did you break your camera lens?" Her smile didn't waver. "Dropped it running from a bear. Silly me, panicked. There are no grizzlies in the Olympics." "Black bear, I meant, obviously." Still smiling. "Can we go home now? I'm so tired." Marcus was raising his flashlight. "Sophia, can you look at me for a second?" She turned toward him, still smiling that unwavering smile, and Daniel saw her eyes. They were Sophia's eyes, the right color, the right shape, but they didn't move quite right, didn't track quite naturally. They fixed on Marcus with an intensity that was somehow both dead and hungry. "What are you?" Daniel whispered. Her head tilted, bird-like. "I'm Sophia Martinez, age 28, born in Albuquerque, New Mexico, wildlife photographer, specializing in large mammals. I have a scar on my left knee from a bicycle accident when I was 7. My favorite color is blue. My mother's name was Elena. I know all these things." She took a step closer. "I am her. I'm wearing her correctly. I practiced." Amy made a sound of pure horror. The thing wearing Sophia's shape looked down at itself, at the body it inhabited, with something like pride. It took 2 days to finish. Had to wait until she was too weak to struggle much. The skin has to come off carefully, you understand? Can't tear it. And then you have to put it on properly. Work your way inside. Feel how it moves. It flexed Sophia's hands experimentally. Humans are complicated. So many little movements, but I think I have it now. Daniel's mind was white noise and static. Not real. Couldn't be real. "The old ones, we stayed in the desert," it continued, conversational. But the world is changing. New places to walk, new shapes to wear. I came north following the migration herds. Found this one taking pictures. She was alone. That's important. They have to be alone. Where is she? Amy demanded, voice breaking. Where is Sophia? It gestured vaguely behind itself. Used the parts I didn't need. Buried some, scattered some. The bones are still there if you want to check. About 3 miles northwest, near a creek bed. I can show you, but... It smiled Sophia's smile with something else behind it. But first I need more practice. I need to learn how you interact, how you talk, what questions you'd ask. So when I walk into your base camp tomorrow, everyone will think I'm her. Everyone will believe. It took another step forward, and Daniel saw that Sophia's Park Service jacket was darker on the left side, stained with something that looked black in the flashlight beam, but was probably red. You can't stop me, it said, matter of fact. If you hurt this skin, I'll just walk. I'll come back later, find another. Maybe one of you next time. You'd be useful. A searcher. Someone who goes into the forest all the time. So many opportunities. Its eyes moved between them, calculating. Which one of you should I be next? Marcus bolted. The thing that wore Sophia watched him run with mild interest, head cocked at that unnatural angle. They always run, it observed. Always the same pattern. Then it dropped to all fours and pursued. What happened next took perhaps 10 seconds, but Daniel would replay it in nightmares for the rest of his life. The thing moved nothing like Sophia, nothing like human. It covered the ground in long, loping strides, arms and legs bending in ways that shouldn't be possible. Marcus's screaming stopped abruptly with a wet, tearing sound. It walked back into the clearing, dragging Marcus's body, already working at the seams of his jacket with Sophia's fingers. This is a male shape, it said thoughtfully. Different proportions, different weight distribution. It'll take time to practice. Daniel and Amy ran. They crashed through the darkness without direction, pure animal panic overriding thought. Daniel felt branches tear at his face, roots catch his feet. Behind them, something was singing Marcus's voice, some children's song from his childhood, something it must have heard him hum once, now rendered in perfect pitch in the darkness. They ran until Amy collapsed and Daniel hauled her up, and they ran further still. They ran until the forest started to lighten with approaching dawn, and Daniel's radio crackled with base camp requesting check-in, and he realized with crystal clarity that they couldn't answer, couldn't tell anyone what was happening. Because if they reported this, if they said the words out loud, they would sound insane, and the thing would have time to perfect Sophia's mannerisms, to study her phone and photos, to walk into base camp and be accepted as the woman who was buried in pieces 3 miles northwest of their last position. It would integrate. It would wear Sophia Martinez's identity and life, and no one would know. They found a logging road at dawn and followed it to a highway. A ranger picked them up, asked about Marcus and Sophia. Daniel heard his mouth giving rational explanations. Separated in the dark, need to organize a proper search, equipment malfunction. The words came automatically while his mind screamed the truth that no one would believe. 3 days later, Sophia Martinez walked out of the forest. Dehydrated, hypothermic, traumatized, but alive. She told a harrowing story of getting lost, of hearing strange sounds, of hiding from something she couldn't quite describe. She identified Marcus's remains when they were found. She cried at his memorial service. She returned to work after a month of leave, though she never went into the field alone again. Daniel Carter retired from search and rescue 6 months later. He'd spent 19 years trusting patterns and logic, and the Olympics had broken something fundamental in his understanding of reality. He moved to Portland, took a desk job, stayed away from forests, but sometimes when he sees Sophia Martinez's name in the news, she's won awards for her photography, become quite successful, he wonders. He remembers that smile too wide for human lips, those eyes that tracked wrong. He remembers Amy Chen, who transferred to a different park and eventually quit the service entirely, who sends him emails every few months asking if he's noticed anything unusual, anything wrong. He remembers checking Sophia's eyes himself after she emerged from the forest, looking for some sign of the wrongness, finding, what? Eyes that moved correctly? Eyes that seemed human? He'd wanted so badly to see proof, and he'd found only a traumatized woman who'd survived something terrible. But he'd also found something else in that brief moment when their eyes met. Recognition. And beneath it, satisfaction. The thing about patterns, Daniel learned, is that they can be studied, mimicked, perfected. And if something studies long enough, learns thoroughly enough, practices diligently enough, how would you ever really know? He sees her sometimes on the news, this Sofia Martinez who looks and sounds and moves exactly right. He sees her accepting awards, giving interviews, laughing at precisely the appropriate moments. And he wonders which Sofia came out of the forest, the woman or the thing that had worn her skin so carefully, practiced her mannerisms so thoroughly, that even those who knew her best could no longer tell the difference. The rational part of his mind, what's left of it, says he's wrong. That trauma has warped his memories, that the real Sofia survived. But late at night when he can't sleep, Daniel Carter remembers that impossible smile in the canopy. Remembers the thing wearing Sofia's shape with such pride. Remembers, I need to learn how you interact, how you talk. So when I walk into your base camp tomorrow, everyone will think I'm her. And he wonders if it's still learning, still watching, still wearing Sofia Martinez's life like the perfect costume it spent 2 days preparing. The worst part is not knowing. The worst part is that he'll never know. Hope you felt real chills. If you appreciate genuine horror, consider following. Which moment scared you most? Christopher Hayes had been with the National Park Service for 12 years. And in that time he'd learned that most missing persons cases in wilderness areas followed predictable patterns. Hikers underestimated distances, overestimated their stamina, ignored weather warnings, or simply wandered off trail and became disoriented. The Boundary Waters Wilderness was over 1 million acres of interconnected lakes and dense boreal forest, straddling the Minnesota-Canada border. Plenty of space to get lost. But people usually turned up within 72 hours, dehydrated and embarrassed, with a newfound respect for topographic maps. Samantha Reed had been missing for 5 days. Chris stood at the ranger station in Ely, Minnesota, reviewing the case file for the 3rd time that morning. October 2011 had been unusually cold, with early snow flurries already dusting the birch and pine. Samantha, 28, experienced outdoorswoman, had entered the wilderness alone on a 4-day solo canoe trip. She'd filed her route plan, checked in at the last required checkpoint, and then vanished. Her permit indicated she was headed toward the remote Chain of Lakes region, an area so isolated that even experienced guides avoided it late in the season. The Ojibwe won't go near that area this time of year, said Tom Bearshield, the local liaison officer who'd grown up on the nearby reservation. He stood by the window, arms crossed, his weathered face troubled. There are stories. Chris looked up from the file. What kind of stories? Tom hesitated. Old stories. About the Wendigo. About what happens when people get too hungry, too desperate, too far from other human beings, when the boundary between this world and the spirit world gets thin. Chris had encountered indigenous folklore before in his investigations, and he always treated it with respect, but he didn't let it cloud his analytical process. I appreciate the cultural context, Tom, but I need to focus on concrete evidence. What do we know for certain? We know 3 other people have disappeared in that same region over the past 40 years. Tom said quietly. We know that Samantha's GPS beacon went dead exactly where the others disappeared. And we know that the search and rescue teams found her canoe yesterday, overturned on the shore of Starvation Lake. The name sent an unwelcome chill through Chris, though he dismissed it as coincidence. Many northern lakes had morbid names, relics of harsh winters and harder times. Was there any sign of her at the canoe site? That's the thing. Tom turned from the window, his expression grim. There were signs, just not the kind you're going to want to hear. An hour later, Chris was in a float plane heading northwest over the endless carpet of autumn forest. Below, countless lakes glittered like shattered mirrors in the weak sunlight. The pilot, A taciturn man named Jensen hadn't spoken since takeoff except to point out landmarks. As they approached the chain of lakes region, Chris noticed the landscape below seemed to darken, the trees growing denser, the lake smaller and more irregular. "That's Starvation Lake," Jensen said, pointing to an elongated body of water that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Even from the air, something about it looked wrong. The shoreline too jagged, the water too dark, the surrounding forest pressing in too close. They landed on a neighboring lake, the floats kissing the cold water with a hiss. A search and rescue team was camped on the shore, and they'd set up a base of operations in a clearing. Chris recognized the team leader, Maria Santos, a no-nonsense woman who'd coordinated dozens of successful rescues. "Hayes," she said, greeting him with a firm handshake. Her grip was strong, but he noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes kept darting toward the tree line. "I'm glad you're here. We need someone to make sense of this. Show me what you found." They hiked 20 minutes through dense forest, following a trail that seemed to resist human passage. Branches caught at Chris's jacket, roots seemed positioned to trip him, and the silence was profound. No bird calls, no rustle of small animals, nothing but the sound of their boots on the frozen ground, and their breath steaming in the cold air. The temperature felt at least 10 degrees colder than it should have been, even accounting for the elevation and tree cover. Samantha's canoe lay on the shore of Starvation Lake like a beached whale. It had been dragged well above the waterline and overturned. That alone was strange. Why would someone in distress take the time to secure their canoe so carefully? Chris circled it slowly, documenting everything with his camera. No obvious damage, no signs of a struggle. The paddles were neatly placed beside it. "That's not what we needed to show you," Maria said. She pointed along the shoreline. "It's the tracks." Chris followed her gesture and felt his analytical mind stumble. Footprints led away from the canoe into the forest. Samantha's hiking boots, he could tell from the tread pattern, but they were interspersed with something else. The other prints were larger, bare, with elongated toes that ended in what looked like claws. They appeared human in basic structure but wrong in proportion. The stride too long, the impression too deep, as if made by something much heavier than its foot size suggested. "Could be a bear," Chris said automatically, though he knew it wasn't. The prints were too deliberate, too bipedal. "Bears don't walk on two legs for extended distances," Maria replied. "And look at this." She led him 30 feet into the forest where the tracks converged. Both sets of prints, Samantha's boots and the other things, seemed to merge, overlap, become confused. Then only the larger prints continued deeper into the forest, but now they appeared heavier, more purposeful, as if whatever made them had grown stronger. Chris knelt beside the tracks, his breath fogging in the frigid air. His mind cataloged explanations: hoax, misidentification, unusual animal behavior. But another part of him, a part he tried to keep buried beneath layers of rational thought, recognized something primal in those prints, something that activated ancient fears coded into human DNA. "There's more," Maria said quietly. "We found her backpack a quarter mile in. Everything was still inside. Food, water, emergency gear, all untouched. But there was something else." She led him to a spot where the search team had erected a small evidence tent. Inside, Samantha's backpack sat on a tarp, its contents carefully arranged. Chris's trained eye immediately noticed what Maria meant. The freeze-dried meals were unopened, the energy bars intact, but there were bones, small bones, cleanly stripped of flesh, mixed in with her camping gear. Animal bones, Chris told himself. Rabbit, maybe squirrel, but the way they'd been cracked open to extract the marrow, the teeth marks on them, there was something methodical about it, something that suggested intelligence and desperate hunger. "We haven't found any animal carcasses in the area," Maria said. "It's like the forest is empty, nothing lives here." As if to punctuate her words, a sound echoed through the trees, a long drawn-out cry that started almost human, and then twisted into something else entirely, something that conveyed an emptiness so vast it seemed to pull at Chris's chest. The search team froze, The sound came again, closer, and this time Chris could hear the hunger in it, a need so profound it transcended physical appetite and became something metaphysical. "Everyone back to base camp," Maria ordered, her voice tight. "Now." They retreated through the forest, and Chris noticed something that made his analytical mind rebel against itself. The tracks they'd made on the way in were gone, not covered by snow or leaves, simply absent, as if the forest had erased their passage. New tracks appeared instead, running parallel to their route back, always just out of sight in the peripheral darkness between trees. That night, back at the base camp, Chris sat in his tent reviewing his notes by LED lantern light. Everything he documented screamed impossibility, yet the evidence was undeniable. He pulled out his laptop and searched for information on Wendigo mythology, finding numerous academic sources that treated it as a cultural construct, a psychological phenomenon called Wendigo psychosis, documented among Algonquian peoples during harsh winters. The Wendigo, according to the sources, was a malevolent spirit associated with winter, starvation, and cannibalism. It was said that a person who resorted to eating human flesh during desperate times could become possessed by the Wendigo spirit, transforming into a monster with an insatiable hunger. The more it ate, the more it hungered, growing larger and more powerful but never satisfied. It was the ultimate taboo violation in Ojibwe culture, the transformation of human into something utterly inhuman through the act of consuming one's own kind. But these were just stories, Chris reminded himself. Cultural narratives created to enforce social cohesion and prevent cannibalism during hard times. There had to be a rational explanation. Perhaps Samantha had encountered someone, a hermit, a disturbed individual living in the wilderness. Perhaps the tracks were elaborate hoaxes. Perhaps. A scream ripped through the night. Chris bolted from his tent. The camp was in chaos. One of the search team members, a young man named Derek, stood at the edge of the clearing, pointing toward the forest. "Something took Maria. I saw her walk toward the trees and something grabbed her. It was huge and it moved so fast." Chris grabbed his flashlight and radio. "Which direction?" Derek pointed with a shaking hand toward a gap in the trees. Chris didn't hesitate. Every instinct screamed at him to stay in the light in the safety of the camp. But Maria was his colleague, and he was responsible for this operation. He plunged into the forest, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Behind him, he heard the other team members calling, organizing, but their voices faded quickly, absorbed by the trees. The forest here felt wrong in ways Chris's rational mind struggled to categorize. The trees seemed to lean inward. The shadows were too deep, and the cold was so intense it burned his lungs with each breath. He found Maria's radio first, lying in the snow. Then her jacket, torn but not cut, torn by something with immense strength. Then blood, dark and steaming in the cold, leading deeper into the forest. The tracks were there too, those same impossible prints, and beside them, drag marks where Maria had tried to resist. Chris followed, his analytical training warring with every survival instinct. He should turn back. He should get more people. He emerged into a clearing he hadn't seen on any map. It was a sacred site, clearly, or had been. Ancient stones arranged in patterns that hurt to look at too long formed a rough circle. Carved into the stones were symbols that Chris recognized from his research. Ojibwe pictographs, but wrong somehow, inverted or corrupted. At the center of the circle stood what looked like a crude altar, and around it were scattered bones. Human bones. Old bones and newer ones, weathered and fresh, decades of accumulation. And standing over the altar, illuminated by his flashlight beam, was something that had once been Samantha Reed. Chris's mind simply refused to process what he was seeing at first. The thing was impossibly tall, 8 or 9 feet, with elongated limbs and grayish skin stretched taut over prominent bones. Its face was a horrible parody of humanity, sunken eyes that glowed with a cold, hungry light, a mouth stretched wide to accommodate too many teeth, all stained dark. It wore shreds of Samantha's clothing, but the body beneath was utterly transformed. as if someone had taken a human being and stretched it, hollowed it, filled it with insatiable emptiness. The creature held Maria in one elongated hand, holding her off the ground effortlessly. Maria was unconscious, blood running from a gash on her head. The thing's other hand was at her throat, claws pressing into flesh, and Chris could see the struggle in its expression. Hunger warring with something else, some last remnant of humanity that still remembered what it meant to be human. "Samantha," Chris said, his voice barely above a whisper. The creature's head snapped toward him with inhuman speed. Its eyes fixed on him, and Chris felt the weight of its hunger like a physical force. But there was something else there too. Recognition, perhaps, or a plea. Its mouth worked and sounds emerged that might have been words if shaped by a human throat. Hungry, it managed, the voice like wind through dead trees. Always hungry. Can't stop. Chris's hand moved to his radio, but the thing was faster. It dropped Maria and lunged toward him in a movement that defied physics, covering 30 feet in what seemed like a single bound. Chris rolled aside, his years of wilderness training taking over where his shocked mind faltered. He came up running, crashing through the underbrush, his flashlight beam jerking wildly. Behind him, he heard the creature following, heard its rasping breath and the crack of branches as it pursued. But something was wrong with its pursuit. It was hesitating, stopping and starting, as if fighting itself. Some part of Samantha was still in there, still fighting the hunger that had consumed her. Chris ran until his lungs burned, until his legs threatened to give out, until he couldn't hear pursuit anymore. He emerged from the forest at a different point along the lake, disoriented and terrified. The base camp was a quarter-mile away, lights visible through the trees. He stumbled into camp, gasping out what he'd seen. The search team stared at him with expressions mixing disbelief and something worse, confirmation. They'd seen things too, heard things, felt the wrongness of this place. Derek radioed for immediate evacuation, declaring the search area compromised by an unknown hostile presence. But as Chris sat wrapped in a thermal blanket, waiting for the float planes to arrive at first light, he couldn't stop thinking about what he'd seen in the creature's eyes. It wasn't just hunger. It was awareness. Samantha knew what she'd become and couldn't stop it. Tom Bearshield had warned him. The stories weren't just stories. They were warnings, cultural knowledge preserved through generations because the threat was real. The Wendigo wasn't a metaphor for cannibalism or madness. It was something that happened when the boundaries between the spirit world and the physical world broke down, when human desperation crossed certain lines, when ancient taboos were violated. Chris pulled out his research notes, reading with new understanding. The Wendigo could only be created when a person consumed human flesh, but the accounts suggested it wasn't always a choice. Some of the older stories spoke of people being tricked into it, fed flesh by malevolent spirits, transformed against their will. He thought of the bones he'd seen around the altar, the evidence of other disappearances. This wasn't the first time. That clearing was a place where the boundary was thin, where something dark waited to cross over, to create more of itself. Samantha had disappeared 5 days ago. According to her permit, she should have reached Starvation Lake on her second day. What had happened in those 3 days before her canoe was found? Had she starved? Gotten sick? Been injured? And what had she encountered in that clearing that had led to her transformation? As dawn broke gray and cold over the boundary waters, the evacuation began. Maria was found 100 yards from the clearing, unconscious but alive, with no memory of what had happened. The official report would say she'd suffered a head injury from a fall, that the search had been suspended due to dangerous conditions, that Samantha Reed remained missing and presumed lost to the wilderness. But Chris knew the truth. He'd seen it with his own eyes, and more importantly, he'd felt it. The hunger that transcended physical need and became something spiritual, something that violated the natural order. His rational mind had been forced to accept what his instincts had known from the moment he'd seen those tracks. There were things in the deep wilderness that science couldn't explain, things that existed in the spaces where human understanding failed. 3 weeks later, sitting in his office in St. Paul, Chris received a package. Inside was a digital camera memory card, unmarked. He hesitated for a long time before inserting it into his computer. The files were corrupted mostly, but 3 images came through. They appeared to have been taken by Samantha herself, selfies taken during her trip. The first showed her smiling on the first day, healthy and happy. The second, dated 2 days later, showed her looking exhausted, her eyes haunted. The third shouldn't have been possible. It was taken in the clearing with the altar. Samantha stood in frame, but she wasn't alone. Behind her, barely visible in the shadows, stood a figure, impossibly tall, impossibly thin. And Samantha was eating something, her hands and mouth dark with blood, her expression one of absolute horror and revulsion at what she was doing, even as she seemed unable to stop. The timestamp on the photo was 3 days before her canoe was found. Chris deleted the images immediately, his hands shaking. He filed his final report with the determination that Samantha Reed was deceased, cause of death undetermined, body unrecoverable due to wilderness conditions. It was the truth, in a way. The woman who had entered the Boundary Waters was dead. What remained was something else. That night he dreamed of the forest. In his dreams he heard that terrible cry again, the sound of endless hunger, of a human soul trapped in something inhuman, calling out across the wilderness. He heard it, and understood that it would call forever until someone else answered, until the cycle continued. Tom Bearshield had been right. The Ojibwe didn't go to that area because they knew what dwelt there, preserved their knowledge through stories so their people would remember to respect the boundaries between worlds. Chris had learned that lesson the hard way. Some disappearances couldn't be solved because the solution existed outside the framework of rational explanation. Some hungers couldn't be satisfied because they originated in realms where human understanding failed. He never returned to the Boundary Waters. But sometimes, on cold October nights, when the wind came from the north, Chris thought he could hear that cry in the distance, hungry, eternal, and utterly inhuman. And he wondered how many others had heard it too, how many had followed it into the darkness, and what they had become when the forest finally claimed them. The case file on Samantha Reed remained officially open, though no further searches were conducted. Chris moved to a different district the following year, requesting assignment far from the northern forests. But he never forgot what he'd seen, and he never stopped believing in the old stories. Because he'd learned the hard truth. Some warnings are written in blood and bone, preserved through generations because the alternative is transformation into something that hungers forever, trapped between the human and the monstrous, belonging to neither world and consumed by both. In the deep wilderness where civilization's light fails and ancient boundaries grow thin, the Wendigo still waits, still hungers, still calls to those who venture too far into the darkness. And sometimes, rarely, someone answers. Hope you felt real chills. If you appreciate genuine horror rooted in authentic folklore, consider following for more terrifying tales. Which moment scared you most? The transformed Samantha in the clearing, or the corrupted selfie that revealed the truth?